All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Vinny Show. Today's guest is Ray Franze. He has this wonderful book. It's a novel that is based on true fiction called The Heights. Ray, welcome to the show. Tell us all about yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm 51. It's my first novel. I'm actually a trader. I've been on the Chicago trading floors since I graduated college in '94. Um, yeah, I had an idea for an entertaining organized crime novel, and I actually thought it was an even better idea for a series. But I decided the best way to sell that would to be write a novel. So in 2019, I started writing, and then we just got published October 10th.
Congratulations. Now tell the viewers, let's dig into it because the beginning is always where they're the most curious. Tell us all tell us the setup about The Heights itself. What's going on
Sure.
in regards to this novel?
Sure. So Chicago Heights is about 35 miles south of Chicago, and it's right on the Indiana border. And what makes Chicago Heights interesting is that the more I kind of learned about them. My parents actually grew up there, so that's kind of how I've heard about it. Um, Chicago Heights, once you learn about their organized crime history, you kind of realize that they played a part in some really big historical going-ons in Chicago and actually nationwide. So after reading a couple works of nonfiction, The Boys in the Heights by Matt Luzzi and The Neighborhood Outfit by Lou Corsino, I really felt like there was a really interesting story that people who love organized crime can see Al Capone, Prohibition, the Chicago outfit in a very unique point of view. And I think people outside of Chicago get a very narrow view of what kind of our thing was here in Chicago. And I really thought I could kind of give a unique angle to the history of Chicago's outfit. It takes place from 1913 to 1971, Vinny. So we span, a long period of time. So we go from pre-Prohibition and to post-World War II, which I call the glory days of the Chicago outfit.
It's pretty amazing, Ray, when, I don't pretend to be an expert in Chicago underworld activity, but from what I've learned and from what I've watched and read and et cetera, it always, in my opinion, always rivaled New York in terms of like a very potent organization. I mean, with obviously its influence into the West Coast.
Yeah, their influence to the West Coast is obviously been known. I mean, really kind of how they built up Vegas. I mean, it really started in the 40s when they got control of the racing wire and how they disseminated all the horse racing results. And they controlled all the printing companies that printed all the, the Heights, the Boys in the Heights, and the crew worked with, Carlos Marcello and the New Orleans guys to, get this race wire and to control all the, printing. So yeah, I mean, the Boys in the Heights, even well outside of Chicago, and the outfit was very keen on knowing New York had their hands full. I think when what they were handling on their own, and they went west and they did it well.
Yeah, and you bring up Carlos Marcello, and again, in my just reading about him, and it's amazing how much more information is out there now than there was years ago. I mean, obviously, it's obvious that when we were growing up, we depended on television or newspaper or books. These days, you can pick up your phone and read just about anything. So, with that being the way it is, I started reading a little bit more recently on Carlos Marcello, and it's amazing how much power this guy had. I mean, it was it was scary, really.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're kind of seeing a lot more of it on social media, but I think you and I are about close to the same age. Um, we didn't, I didn't really know anything about the New Orleans organized crime. And I mean, I knew that they were there, but I really didn't, I think, have an understanding for his national weight, I guess I would say, to your
Yeah,
point.
yeah, and going back to Chicago itself, I mean, we here in Philly, we have a Eastern State Penitentiary, which is a very old. I guess it's mid or late 1800s. It's a penitentiary. It's a jail. It looks like this big castle plopped right in the middle of a very nice neighborhood. But that was where Capone stayed. There's a room that's still original from when he was there, with a little light from his era, from the 30s, I guess.
Mhm.
And so everybody goes and sees the Capone. And an interesting side note: a friend of mine, his grandfather, I think it was grandfather or maybe great grandfather, actually bunked with Capone and used to see him like every day. And so it
That's
was pretty
correct.
interesting. It's like, wow, really, it's Capone has become almost larger in life as far as as a legendary figure. With so much videos, movies,
Mhm.
cartoons, even. But when we think, I actually had I do have family in Chicago. I've never really been there, but I've always been impressed by how influential they've been. The underworld, obviously that's what we're talking about here. So when we
Mhm.
talk, I never heard about the Heights though. That's something to me that's thanks to you, I've become more aware of.
Thank you. Yeah, they have a unique story, and so in the turn of the 1900, Chicago Heights had their own mob boss. They were not part of Big Jim Colosimo's outfit. He was the kind of the one who started it, and Torrio was his right hand man at the time. But Chicago Heights had their own boss. They were Sicilian led with the Union Siciliana, um, and that's actually the common foe. Um, when Al started getting involved in Chicago with Johnny Torrio when Al was fighting with the Irish and with some of the other Italians, most specifically the ones who were backed by the Union Siciliana. Capone, um, before that, in the early 20s, right when he got to Chicago, him and Johnny Torrio used to go out to Chicago Heights. Uh, they used to have a good time, and they wanted to kind of see what they kind of had going out there, 30 miles south of Chicago. Like I said, they were not part of the outfit. They were, if anything, they didn't like Torrio and Capone coming out that far into their territory. But Capone and the Calabrian led gang in Chicago Heights became friends. The Calabrian led gang didn't really like kind of the protection they were getting. They felt like a second class crew to all the Sicilian led crews, I believe. And when the beer wars and prohibition were starting to heat up, Al Capone saw that he had a very good alliance with this Calabrian crew and saw something in these guys. And he was the one who said, if you guys take over the Heights and, deliver it to me, I'll make you, a lieutenant. And that's basically what they did. Chicago Heights went to war during Prohibition. They actually couldn't have won the war without a very powerful Sicilian family. You think it sounds like they're going to war with the Sicilians, and they kind of were, but they didn't really go to full war until they had the backing of a Sicilian family that controlled the confectionery business in Chicago Heights. If you're controlling the confectionery business in Prohibition, you control all the sugar. So you've got that huge piece of raw material that everyone needs to make their illegal booze. So once this very powerful Sicilian family actually sided with this Calabrian crew, they went to war and they took over the Heights in the mid 20s. And they decided not to keep it for their own. And they decided, I think, for, I would say, obvious reasons, let Capone handle it, and let him be the face of it. And they just held on to what was their territory, Northwest Indiana, and a lot. But I think they let Capone be the face of the outfit, let him garner the attention, and they kind of wanted to just stay back. And that's the reason why no one knew about Chicago Heights. They wanted to keep a low profile, and they kind of let Chicago be the front man.
Well, Ray, I think that is probably the smart move. I mean, everything that you're saying, it was all strategy, and so these were all a series of different things that were implemented, and it makes sense to basically make Capone the head of it, because let's face it, back in those days too, everything's political, even organized crime. So it would seem, and I'm not sure exactly what period, but it would seem that kind of Capone was the chosen one nationally. So why would you go
100%.
to war? I mean, if he had the blessings of everyone else in the nation, why not?
Well, I think that's what the boys in the Heights knew. They might win this battle, but if they thought that their friend wasn't going to come after their territory after he took over, like that was probably, you're probably, once they saw, like they had a big thing going, they were down there and they were big earners. So I don't think that they were going to be able to keep it and like decide that they were going to, stay boss without eventually having another war on their hand.
It was a profitable compromise.
Yeah, I think, and you know what? L was friends with a lot of these guys in Chicago Heights. He spent time there. When he got into trouble, he hid there. Fred Burke, who was a known gunman of the Valentine's Day Massacre, before he got arrested in Michigan, he was hiding out in Chicago Heights. So yeah, I mean, the Boys in the Heights had a really unique angle to Al Capone and how they saw him and dealt with him, which is was one of the reasons why I wanted to write a novel, because kind of can shed light on him that is a little different and kind of how they saw him.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of general information out there on Capone, but it's nice that there's still stories that emerge. And I know there's fiction involved here, but I know that there's still good. It's nice to know there's still good stories that still haven't been told. And with the Heights, I think you've also, and of course, it's a novel. Um, I guess you would say there's some truth, there's some fiction, right? I mean, how would you say?
It's highly historical. I cited my sources to you earlier. A lot of all the big hits and assassinations in my book they're all based on fact and in research, which is the reason why I wanted to cite those like immediately in my acknowledgments, because I think that's what makes this flashback. It's a flashback first person memoir, and when he's going back and he's telling stories, I mean, I think that's what makes guys who are like organized crime as a hobby. It's kind of or at least who like the genre is for books and movies and TV shows like me. Um, they it's historical, which I want it to have credibility, but obviously going from 1913 to 1971, to make it entertaining, you're creating dialogue and you extrapolate on things, and therein lies fiction. But you know a lot of the big going on all the big goings on are very historical. And there's five nights in Chicago that are infamous. There's a place called used to be called the Villa Venice. It was Sam Giancana's place, and it's out in the north suburbs. Call it 15-ish, 20 miles, 15 miles outside of the city. And it was on the Des Plaines River. and this is early 60s. Sam Giancana. It's right. It is right around the presidential election, I believe. The JFK election. Giancana has this new club that he's going to open up, and to repay the favor of what the outfit did for the Kennedys, Sinatra had the Rat Pack play 5 nights in Sinatra's club called the Villa Venice. So these 5 nights, the Rat Pack played Jam House. There was casinos set up in there. It was on the Des Plaines River. Giancana had gondolas shipped in from Italy. It was a friend of a guy in Chicago Heights who had the connection, who had them imported for Giancana. So there's another Chicago Heights connection. And I actually knew a couple of people who were at one of those shows with the Rat Pack, Sammy and Frank and Dean Martin. And the account of that night in my book is probably one of the most true accounts of anything in the whole book, which is, it seems like not a big deal, but people post about that, the Villa Venice and, the Chicago outfit groups. And, I was lucky enough to talk to people who were there for a night, and their account of that, what they're wearing, the jokes they were telling. I mean, that's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really cool. And you bring up Sam Giancana, and I tell you, there goes another figure. Geez, I mean, there's so much, just amazing, scandalous material. I mean, we could be here all night with that.
Mm-hmm.
But it just, again, the underworld and their influence and their ability to dominate politics. They saw very early politics, unions, all the different infiltrations, Hollywood. I mean, all those, and that's when we talk about Giancana and his influence too with the West as far as Hollywood. It's just, I just can't get over how much power that these individuals were able to attain, and it's scary. But then again, there's a right now, I believe, and maybe you would agree with this. I think now there's been so much of a resurgence of interest, and if I could say love, for the romanticism of organized crime.
Yeah.
And I think, what I think it's the reason why is because society seems to be in so much disorder now.
A little bit.
Ironically, we look at the mob, and well, I would have to say probably the pinnacle back in the 60s, the 50s, the 70s, when they really did practically control the country.
Yeah, I mean, their political capital was scary. I think, Chicago had a big case in the 80s. It was called Operation Greylord. And that was, and the FBI was bringing down Chicago and federal judges that were, tied to organized crime. I think that's when people really realized how deep Chicago controlled things. I mean, we joke here in Chicago that the outfit taught our politicians how to do business. And we really find that to be true. All the legal rackets, right, that we were all, under control of organized crime, they're all legal now. Numbers, lottery,
Horses.
Yeah. Alcohol legal, marijuana legal. It's all coming, Illinois. It's funny how, I mean, look at our politicians. Our last 3 or 4 governors have gone to jail. I mean, when I say our organized crime in Chicago taught our politicians how to do business, it's unfortunately, it's scary, but maybe the country will stop putting our politicians in place of power in Washington. You guys need to wake up around the country.
Yeah, I think we need to take a look at the way we're doing business on a political level anymore. I don't know, but it's like, for instance, I really enjoyed watching Boardwalk Empire, and Capone's in there, and those characters from the outfit. But it's hard not to admire and really fall in love with the romantic side of it. I mean, but in reality, these were very
Right.
tough, ruthless, people. Look, in Philly, there's no difference. I mean, there's so many stories of, you know, uh, prohibition era murders and wars. I mean, the Lanzetta brothers were like seven brothers or nine brothers. I don't know. I forget now, but they were like most of them were gunned down in my neighborhood. A block from where I grew up, the Italian Market in South Philly, there was still are. I mean, they're covered up, but it was a series of underground tunnels where they did their bootlegging, and many people don't even know that.
Yeah.
Lot of fascinating stuff, and they were close to Atlantic City, right in proximity, and there was a ton of breweries in Philadelphia. There was like 70 at one time back in those days.
I believe it. I believe it. Um, yeah, I mean, it's I actually try to, I think I try to put a little Boardwalk Empire actually into my novel. It's, I loved that show. And it's funny that some of these shows too, like Boardwalk Empire, I watched that. I'm like, I sometimes Chicago see how other people portray Al Capone. And it's I think a little different than the way we see him. Especially like that new Capone movie, that with Tom Hardy, who's actually one of my favorite. It's kind of like in Capone's later years, and you know, I think Chicago and Capone, I feel like they try to portray them a little bit more. I think Al gets portrayed in a really like out of control. The last couple of things I've seen him in, like make him look to be a cocaine addict. Never heard anything about that, or heard, his so in Boardwalk Empire, they show him showing a huge temper with his kid and almost like kicking him, and we're like, so some guys in Chicago, including myself, like I didn't try to protect Al, but like, I think New York and other guys around the country tried to push Al down a little bit, and like really how big and important he was. And he did it because he didn't really care if you were Sicilian, Napolitan, Calabrese, Abruzzese, Jewish, Irish, German. He just wanted to know if he could trust you and you're going to do business in his outfit. We didn't have a mafia. We hear about guys getting made in Chicago, but you know what? Getting made in Chicago, yeah, but I know a lot of guys in Chicago Heights were huge. I don't know if they were made ever, but like, so things are just done a little bit different here. I think Capone's been portrayed, I think, a little bit oddly at times. And I tried to really portray him just as I think the guys in the Heights saw him. And that was really like a friend. His tenure was short, right? He went to jail, and he was only boss in Chicago for a short bit. But I really tried to, I think, not glorify like the Chicago guys. I think it's a very raw book. I think it's pretty ruthless, as far as I think my accounts of how I describe the murders, I think, which will give mob fans what they want. But yeah, I think you try to really produce a entertaining product for everyone, but not glamorize it, and not make these guys look like total monsters either. Which is like, to your point, like there's a lot of love for the mob, but gangsters are self-serving, right? Gangsters are egomaniacs. Gangsters are narcissists, right? So, it's hard to write characters that are likable. they're very matter of fact, which has kind of been some of the big criticisms of my book is some of the readers find like the character's hard to like get behind, but I get it, you know. Yeah, there's been a resurgence, I think, for mob fascination. And I mean, that's really one of the reasons why I thought I had an idea for a mob show when I was watching TV and watching mob movies. And I'm like, the Chicago Heights has got an angle, and I decided to write a novel about it.
Well, Ray, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think this should be, and I'm sure this has crossed your mind, but this should be a series. I mean, it's such a wonderful angle on things, and what I like the most is that you don't take, as you said, you really don't go for or against the character. You're just trying to, they're just honest, and that's the whole, that's the beauty of it, because you're there's no bias in it. You're just trying to portray people honest in their environment as they are, and that's a credit to your writing and also your imagination, even if there is some truth to it. It's I agree with you in regards to Al Capone. I think that for many years he's kind of been portrayed, and I think mischaracterized as like a brute or maybe uneducated or whatever. But he's a brilliant man.
Yeah, I mean, he knew that there was a better way to do business than, the way the Sicilians were trying to get it done, in the early 20s. Like I said, he knew how to do business with anyone, and his tenure would have lasted longer. But all the guys who ran Chicago for the 30 years after he was gone were all his boys. They were all Al's boys. All the guys in Chicago that took over for Al, into the 50s and 60s, Accardo, Giancana, Iupa, all those guys go back to the 20s with Al, and including the guys who were running the Heights, into the 70s, until they either passed away or retired. All those guys went all the way back to Capone. And it's kind of funny because after all those Capone guys really stopped running things, I mean, Chicago's been decimated by the law in the last 30 years. So we just had that family secrets trial in 2005. That really wiped out Chicago outfit. I'm not saying they're gone, but it did a number on them. And yeah, I think people miss when the Italians were running Vice in Chicago. It's a bit different now.
Yeah, right. I mean, this is the kind of the murmuring that has been going on in Philly, in New York, because I'm up there every so often, and I have a lot of friends up there, and it's the same thing, man. It's it's a weird thing, I guess, but people long for the days where and we're talking about the maybe the good aspects here, but neighborhoods were safe. People weren't scared to walk outside or leave their windows open. There was access there were access to things. If you needed a job, if you had a problem, it was almost like its own self-contained government.
Yeah.
Beyond the government. Now, there's pros and cons to that. Obviously, there's a lot of bad things that go along with that. But then again, there's a lot of bad things that go along with these elected politicians too.
Well, that would,
you got to pick your poison.
Yeah, I mean, we got aldermen, a big case going on right now. We're going to be taking down some aldermen out of Chicago for misappropriations. So, I mean, it's never going to stop. I think Chicago, people ask me about the outfit in Chicago and maybe like where they stand in like the hierarchy. And honestly, like I say somewhere between 3 and 4, maybe. And I don't know, like if I'm doing them a favor by saying that, but I don't think they're like in the top 2. I think Mexico runs Chicago. I think they have for a long time, just based on what is going on here. And Eastern Europeans have really made a huge foothold in the Chicago area in the last 25 years. I think they're very present as well. And I also think since 2005, the Italians are just completely changing the way that they're doing things. They've completely gone underground, which I think is smart. I think if the mob didn't extort money from legitimate businesses, they would have a whole even different, even more glorified reputation, quite honestly. Right? If they stuck to vice and didn't really extort, legitimate businesses, because I think that was one of the hardest things for me to, you know, and you kind of like find entertainment with the mob. You're like, man, these guys were stealing from their own, and that was kind of unfortunate and crappy. But when it comes to, who was controlling vice and how crime was getting done in a city and who had to answer to who, it's different. And I also feel like the government is afraid of certain groups too. They're not afraid of Italians because Italians have a code.
Yeah,
And
I would have to agree with that because I noticed that too. I said to myself, with all the unbelievable amount of drugs and just the havoc that drugs has done in our country, forget about streets or cities, or it's everywhere. It's horrible. It's destroying us. And maybe I'm just not paying attention close enough, but I don't see them doing an effective job the way they would against the Italians. And I think it's because, and I'm
right.
saying this, I guess, as an Italian, maybe it's self-serving to say it, but I feel like I think there's a certain belief that the government is more afraid of the Italians than anybody else because of what we were able to do. Not we, but the Italians were able to do.
Well, yes, and at the time, I feel like they're not afraid of us because they know we have a code. They know Italians had a code, and they brought RICO statutes against Italians in mass. And there's those how come they're not using RICO statute laws against, I mean, I'm cartel for one. So I think
Politicians.
I think they're petrified because I think that they know that they're afraid that, certain groups don't have a code. And if they find out what agents are on their case, that they're threatened. So yeah, I think the government, and I think they're full blown afraid of certain organizations. Either that or the money's so big those organizations own our government at this point, which I think is a part of that too.
It's scary, and you know what?
So,
As we've learned with other mob stories and crime stories, you never know till like 30 or 40 years later, anyway.
well, we figured out our CIA was, running drugs with them to pay for arms to, fight communists and,
Yeah.
South and Central America. So yeah, I had people ask me that a lot, and I think the government is one, they're afraid of other organizations, and two, that those organizations actually are that powerful because the money is that big that they now own enough that we don't see RICO statutes coming up against certain organizations, and I can't figure out why.
Yeah, it's scary. And you know what? I guess every ethnic group kind of, comes along and has their massive degree of corruption. And then eventually they get dealt with. I hope that's the case especially with all the stuff that's going on now. I also think though that from my own personal research, a lot of the Italians that were into maybe organized crime, believe it or not, a lot of them went legit. A lot of them got out, as you would see. But the first ones too, I think that really made the foray into legitimate business and totally washed their hands were Jewish. The Jewish people, the Jewish gangsters, they were very brilliant enough to get what they needed out of organized crime and just get out and just go right into legitimate businesses. And so I do see a lot of tiny families that have gone completely legitimate,
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of families who were involved in the turn of the century, early 1900s, 1920s, and 30s, think some of those people involvement were actually like a lack of opportunity, right? And then, you know, then those families, their kids had opportunity, and actually, you know, at least in Chicago, it's quite common for families who had ties. They didn't want their family like anything to do with it after them, right? So I think that was big. I think that Chicago too, like they really didn't want anyone after their generation involved. They wanted, you know, like we did it for our reason. You don't have the reason why we had to do it type of mentality. But yeah, I think getting into legitimate businesses is huge. I think some of them waited way too long to do that. But yeah.
Well, it's also the same thing like politicians. Once you have power, if you have a certain degree of power, it's not easy giving up that kind of power. You know, it's just not.
True. True.
Well, Ray, I'll tell you what, I can't say enough about it. I want to show our viewers again. This is a wonderful novel. I really hope you pick it up. Now, Ray, where can they find you? Where can they find the book?
Yeah, the book is for sale on Amazon. You can get it on barnesandnoble.com, or you can order it on bookshop.org and have it shipped to your favorite local bookstore if that works for you. But Amazon and Barnes and Noble are pretty common.
And what I'll do, obviously, is the description in the description area of this video, you'll see the links. So I encourage you guys, please, please, you're going to love this, especially if you're a fan of the genre. Even if you're not, check it out. It's a great, great novel. Ray, I want to see this turned into a series or a movie, man. And I dabble. If I can ever be of help, let me know.
I appreciate it. You know, I just thought of something. I had a Wilbur Montgomery jersey when I was a kid.
Nice.
I just remembered that. Yeah. I mean, I'm a big Walter Payton fan, but I kind of gravitate to all the running backs back in the late 70s, early 80s. And I actually had a Wilbur Montgomery jersey. They were my second favorite team. Ron Jaworski.
Yeah.
Yeah.
George.
I was an Eagles fan. The Bears were so terrible still back then that I needed somebody else.
Well, I was tiny. I don't know. It might have been like, it's his early 80s. I was probably like less than 6 years old, but I met him with my sister, and he was just, you know, I imagine being a 4-year-old meeting Wilbur Montgomery, but huge. But it was pretty cool. I got the autograph somewhere. I don't know where, but
That's awesome.
Chicago's always been near and dear also to me. Like I said, it's some family out there. I've never been there. But I still have family there, people that came from the same part of Calabria as my parents that are cousins that live there. It's
Awesome.
rumored, although I have no way of proving it, but it's rumored that we're related to Frank Nitti somehow. But I thought he was.
I mean, you never know.
But you never know.
You never know.
Yeah. Who knows on the tree? Maybe you don't want to know.
You know what? So like 70% of these, you know, people left Southern Calabria because of the horrible unemployment. So yeah, a lot of family members left together, and, you know, these towns were small and tight. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people were related to one another, man. We're probably third cousins. I'm half Calabrese.
I should hope so, right? I should be so lucky. Well, listen, everyone, I want to just thank our guest again, Ray Franze. You are the man. I love this novel. I can't stop saying it. And I want everyone to honestly, seriously, please check it out. They could also find you on Instagram, right? And Facebook, all the social medias.
Yeah, even TikTok, bro, which is TikTok.
Yeah. Well, we'll be seeing you on there, right? And I want you to just please, again, just continue doing what you're doing. Promote. We'll help you on our end as well. And
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time. Peace to Philly.
Amen. And let's go Eagles and Bears.
All right.
Thanks again, everyone. This has been Ray Franze with his book, again, The Heights, a wonderful novel, historic crime novel based on organized crime. And there's a lot of good stuff that you need to check out that's contained in that book. So again, friends, thanks for checking us out. As always, if you haven't already, please subscribe to Vinny from South Philly page here and check out Ray Franze. Go in that description box, buy that book, check it out, and then also make sure you send the review. I'm sure he would appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Thanks so much.